Warning. The opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not reflect those of the establishment, the man, or any of his affiliates. The views presented are for entertainment purposes only and do not construe advice, neither legal, medical, or metaphysical, nor do they entail the encouragement of the use of substances in jurisdictions where those substances are illegal.
The Crass and the Spurious is a potentially powerful synaptic inducer. If you or your loved ones suffer from automatonitis, human sheep syndrome, socioeconomic induced stupor, or general chuckleheadedness, Crass and the Spurious use may help alleviate most symptoms.
Side effects may include twitching, realization of past follies, catharsis, casting off the yoke of oppressive crypto-fascist cultural models, OBEs, interminable soliloquies to loved ones and friends, synesthesia, dislocation from the time-space continuum, and possible ego death.
Ask your physician or ethnopharmacologist if the Crass and the Spurious is right for you.
What's up, brother?
How are you doing?
Merry Christmas. For the new year.
Indeed. So this is the inaugural podcast of the Crass and the Spurious. Is that what we decided?
The Crass.
Yeah.
And the Spirit.
Crass and the Spurious.
This one's to Otto.
Yeah, absolutely.
So to Otto, but also starring to Terence McKenna, who's the pioneer of, well, maybe not the pioneer, but the champion, the recent champion of the heroic dose of doing 5 drug grams of psilocybinous mushrooms. So.
Mushrooms are my thing. I mean, they enlightened me, they straightened me out, they love me. But the way to do mushrooms is the very first move, if you're interested in mushrooms, is, for God's sake, buy a scale. Buy a scale. I mean, you wouldn't think that this would be considered such an exotic suggestion to people who are going to put their bodies and minds on the line, because people don't take enough. People do not take enough mushrooms. They take pissant amounts and then they claim that they're initiates. You must take a measured 5 dried grams on an empty stomach. Measured. And when you see what that is, you'll realize that, you weren't even camped in the atrium, you were camped in the driveway.
So, let's just lay it out for people who are unaware.
Sure, show, my brother.
Okay. So the idea is that throughout history, there's been many different methods and ways of trying to reach the other side or enlightenment or touch the bardo or the astral plane or whatever the heck you want to call it. Intense yoga, intense deprivation. People have taken themselves to the edge of death to try and just take a peek at what's going on. But also, throughout history, people have used hallucinogens to kick down the door, as it were. And in this case, the hallucinogen is mushrooms, and the amount required is 5 grams on the nose.
Indeed.
And through 5 grams of mushrooms and isolating your senses, sensory deprivation essentially.
5 dried grams alone in silent darkness, I believe, is the rallying call.
Through that, you can take a peek at time and space, the other side. Now, my experience, I didn't take, I took 5 grams obviously, but I didn't do it entirely in darkness. There was times where I did lock myself in a room, and then there was other times where I went out and, because the moon was amazing, and I was in this Oberon's garden of awesomeness. So
Me too. No, I think the phenomenon of waves, at some points, you're pinned to whatever surface you're calling home. And at other points, you're almost, it's almost like you're totally lucid. You're, maybe smoking a J or something, and yeah, you get up and you walk around. And so, yeah, to go out into nature at that point, and then maybe come back.
Well, for me, I went out as soon as I ate them and sat on a dock with this picturesque view of, the woods and the lake and the sunset. It was just the sun was setting. And I just went into like doing some qigong breathing and yoga. I sat in lotus position and just started really breathing, and like, because the mushrooms sort of take away everything else, I was able to focus completely on the breathing. And then I visualized myself opening up each of my chakras, and after that things went crazy. I started seeing through time and space, essentially.
Yeah, I think you're touching on a super important point of this whole thing that really rang true for me also, which is the sacramental nature of plant hallucinogens. And it seems almost silly to consider some of these religious practices absent these plant hallucinogens as part of the ceremonial approach to the situation.
It is once you've done it. But
once you've done it,
the other people's perspective, it's like,
but it's important to
going
think about that other person's perspective, because you and I both attempted a lot of those practices absent hallucinogenic fuel, so to speak, and they're somewhat frustrating. You do a lot of yoga, you do a lot of maybe chanting or meditation, and it guess it works.
I was doing a lot of chanting too, actually.
To a certain extent. Exactly, it works to a certain extent when you're not stoned.
Right.
But when you do that sort of stuff,
you can focus entirely on it without any of the distraction.
And what's eerie to me is that, after you're off it and you start doing some of your homework and you start to realize that, there are specific parts of your brain that are specifically seemingly designed to receive these chemical keys to perform precisely this function. And it's not a terrible function, it's not an accidental function, it's a function that makes you value life in a huge way because of your newfound ability to perceive the depth of the experience that you're having. 5 dry grams. What
Well,
it's more than you would normally do. When you look at
yeah, I've never done that amount of, I've done mushrooms before, but I usually stuck around 1 gram and, would have fun with my friends or whatever and run around like an idiot. But this was an entirely different experience. And like one where I truly felt overwhelmingly like I'd been there the whole time, like this was home. And the other thing that I experience through life is like connected to it, but not the whole picture. It felt very much like I'm so comfortable here and I've been here all my life.
Wonderful, but alarming that some aspect of that is more real than what we're experiencing.
Well, and I think it's probably connected to the fact that it's similar to dreaming. When you're in that dream state of being semi-conscious.
So what's the connection? Dreams,
very much in that zone.
Orgasm, sexual pinnacle, the life death experience, 5 dried grams, dimethyltryptamine. What's the connection with all this stuff? What's going on there?
I don't know. I think it just allows you to. Well, first of all, I think there is an overwhelming connection between all living things. That there's a subconscious telepathic link between everyone at some level, right? That's what, when I talk about the astral plane or the bardo, or I read about anything like that, that's sort of what comes to my mind, is that at some level in between life and death, all of our conscious minds are connected. And maybe like one of the feelings I got, because I felt so at home when I was in that state, was that this life is merely a projection on the wall of your real state, which exists elsewhere and is overwhelming and eternal. Well, maybe not eternal, but you know what I mean. Like, it was a feeling like, okay, I'm cut off normally from what I should be having access to, which is just everything. This feeling of being connected to everything. I really got into a state of when I was moving, because it was, I was really high and kind of drunken, and it was dark and wooded, right? There's a few like twinkly lights in the woods, but for the most part I couldn't see the ground, and it was all bumpy and rough. So I got into this state of walking and moving that was so Taoist and like deeply rooted in Tai Chi that I couldn't believe my connection to the Tao, and how every movement needed to have the exact opposite movement in order for me to stay balanced because of the unevenness of the ground. So if I wanted to go forward, I had to just lean back and then push myself forward and then lean back that way, and then it was almost like the drunken fist style of
the subtext of that
but
seems to be that's a state that's constantly available to you. If you're,
Indeed.
It's not.
Well, and that was another thing that really came to my mind throughout the trip, was that I don't need the drug to get to the state. There is a level of meditation that you can get to where you could get to this point.
So that's a phenomenon that McKenna talks about that I really like, and he sort of says, the usefulness of these massive heroic doses, as he calls them, is only achieved when you bring something back to the tribe, right? Or bring even something back to yourself in a non-high state that's not garbage, that's not just hallucinogenic babbling. So, but when you as someone who's training in Tai Chi and Kung Fu, when you come back with that sort of insight into how to move in the dark, that's kind of like a tangible result that you wouldn't necessarily have ever come to that realization absent that thing. Mm-hmm. And I think that is a hallmark of the experience. There's a lot of tryingness. It's sometimes terrifying when you get into that space. Like, there's a lot of surrender and kind of resigning yourself to, holy smokes, I've done this thing and I'm going to have to feel these ways for this certain amount of time, and that's inevitable. But I think there's something to be gained from the perspective that is achieved while you're there, and
being completely off balance but in control and balanced at the same time was an interesting thing.
And something that you can replicate when you come back. So my story of something that I can replicate when I come back is kind of like silly compared to that, but when you're there, when you're in the middle of this experience, many strange and bizarre things come to pass, and a thing that is McKenna mentions is a dialogue, and for me, I definitely felt that sort of dialogue, and one of the things that I had happen to me was like, again, show me what you can do is one of the kind of themes of what he talks about engaging in with this thing. So that's one of the things that I said, what can you do? So do you like time travel? And I said, fucking yeah, I like time travel. And I said, grab your recorder, your flute, come up with a name of a random time, place, and event as the title of a song, and then begin improvising that song, because you can always improv some sort of fucking jig if you can play the recorder even half-assedly. And through playing that song that will be period-based, you will hallucinate that which you wish to see in your mind's eye. And I'm like, that's fucking ridiculous. And it was like, try it out. And I was like, okay, the tune of the Atlantean captain. And it was like, that's fucking vague as balls, dude. You can do better than that. And so I said, all right, the tune of the Atlantean captain who's coming home with his vessel full and his voyage complete and his crew happy. And I played this fucking fucked up like nautical jig that I've never like played before, and I had these like weird, not just like visualizations, but like the feeling of what it felt to have completed a fucking huge navigation of treacherous waters, and to have done all the, and to have this, and to have a loving family, and how I felt all these fucking sentiments, and I like threw my recorder down. I was like, bullshit. That didn't just happen. And like the dialogue in my mind, yeah, try it again. I was like, okay. The tune of the dudes who built the workers who moved the rocks that built the pyramids. And the man was like, okay. And a completely different, like the weirdest style of tune I've ever played with my recorder. I played almost more like a didgeridoo. It was like, and I had like this fucking vision of like rocks like moving in like symmetrical timing with like the fucking vibrations in my head with along like water-filled channels and shit. It was like, and I was like, is this replicatable when I'm not high as balls? And the answer was, yeah, it is. And the next morning, I did something simple. It wasn't like super weird. It was like the tune of the Andalusian shepherd, something like that. And I was like, holy shit, hills and sheep, and it still seemed to work out. So that's all I got.
So you have like a magic flute.
Okay, that's another thing. That's another thing. Not only did the mushroom say that, like, I could do that, it said there's someone in your life who can do this way better than you can do it. And they have, like, this untapped skill. And it was, like, my buddy Seamus. And I went to my buddy Seamus, I, like, told him the whole thing, and he was like, I know. On some level, I know. And he like started doing it. He like reported back. He's like, yeah, you time travel now, you motherfucker. So, there's something to it, man. It's fucking weird. I'm not, obviously can't time travel, but he can specifically, the tune of the fucking guy who was singing on the Titanic, and you can close his eyes and have a semi-accurate daydream of what that must have been like. And I'm not saying that's time traveling, but that's a fucking interesting phenomenon.
Grant Morrison, like the writer of he wrote Batman,
Indeed.
The Invisible, and a bunch of different things. He went on about magic in a few different interviews I've heard with him. He's got the wonderful like Scottish classical accent, But he went on, and his sort of take on magic was sort of an invocation of removing everything else from your awareness.
So it's
but
not
the thing that you're trying to invoke.
Yeah.
So if you want to invoke the spirit of John Lennon, you would just surround himself entirely with
John
Lennon
shrine.
and like and just
and
at that point he could sort of think and become and sort of understand something more about that. And so that's an interesting idea.
Sicking out the window, and that was the end of it to a certain extent. But I still do that magic and occult stuff,
What do you mean you still do it?
I still do rituals and
What kind of rituals? Explain.
just summoning God forces and try to help people and
So how does, and what is like in a, like, I mean, is there do you sit in like a fucking circle and shit like that?
yeah, because if that's what gets you off, because the whole idea is right, there's no rules to this, it's just what works. Because I grew up in this chaos magic tradition, and this could take us off in mad fucking tangents. I don't know how far we want to go, but
No, go.
But say for the invisibles, right? I mean, basically, I grew up. Chaos magic says, like, if you do certain things, certain changes occur in your consciousness. Let's just call them magic for now and try them out.
Totally.
Okay? So they say, like, you don't have to summon up Egyptian gods. As long as you summon up an energy that stands for whatever the Egyptians believed in, you'll get the same effects. So I tried a bunch of this stuff. So, you know, one of the things I always say, like the Greeks had this god Hermes, right? Is the guy with the winged hat and he runs around, he's the messenger of the gods. So in the days of the Greeks, what Hermes represented was the idea of communication, specifically language, because language can pass ideas across vast distances and across time and all kinds of stuff. So suddenly that's a pretty occult idea. It's a magical idea. You know, a king can make a statement and then 200 years later people still hear it.
Right.
That's what language can do. So they created the idea of, imagine language looked like something. Well, it would look like a beautiful youth with a winged hat and winged heels, and he can go anywhere, and, you know, he carries messages. So that was all that was, right? They never believed there was a guy on Mount Olympus, like, you know, hanging out with Laurence Olivier.
Right.
But they just said if communication looked like anything, here's a symbol.
Right.
You know, in the same way that if vengeance looks like something, here's Batman.
Right.
So and the same goes Aphrodite, goddess of love. Well, somewhere in the world, somebody's in love right now, right? They're feeling it. They're feeling the peak of fiery passion somewhere right now. And if you extend it, every moment, somebody's feeling that. And sometimes it's us that gets to feel that. Yeah. But somewhere in the world is always love. So the Greeks said, well, that quality of eternal love is Aphrodite. She's always there. And we get to feel her. And when we're possessed by Aphrodite, we're filled with love. Right? So you get, say, rage, like Ares, war. When you're angry, you're possessed by the god of war. But somewhere there's always war. Somebody's always angry. So there's an eternal quality of anger that never fucking goes away through the entire history of human interaction. And that's what they called gods. So basically when you're doing magic, all you're doing is kicking everything out of the room that isn't Hermes. So that you're totally enthused by communication and speed and fucking let me talk, fucking poetry.
Are you by yourself?
You don't have to be. You can be with people.
What do you do?
We can do it now.
Because if I'm going to ever do this, I'm going to do what you do.
Well, you do things that make you feel speed. So you drink Red Bull, you drink coffee, and you play Madonna's Ray of Light, or you look at Flash comics and you just get everything out of your head but the idea of speed and communication until you are a god. Right?
Is that possible?
Of course it's possible. That's what people have been doing for thousands of years, and they call it magic. But it's just this. It's just connecting with the eternal idea of communication. And being with it for a little bit, you know.
So then, what happens when you get to that state? Is there a place where I've crossed over into? What do you call it?
It's just enthusiasm, let's call it, because that means literally being possessed by a god.
Right.
So you're enthused by the spirit of communication. So pick up a pen, do shit, you'll be super creative. Or otherwise, you're enthused by the spirit of love and you're about to meet your girl or your boy, or, you know, and you're filled with it. You know, if you want to be James Bond for the night, play James Bond records, conjure him, wear a tuxedo. So I was testing this stuff. I thought, if you can conjure these just states of mind to the point where you feel like a god has taken over, can you do it with things that aren't real? You know, so I tried it with John Lennon. And although he's real, he's dead.
Right.
So I thought, let's do ritual magic. And I surrounded myself with my Beatles albums, and I wore the paisley shirt and the tight trousers and the Beatle boots, and I got my Rickenbacker out.
How old are you?
This is like when I was 30. This is when I was doing hardcore magic, when I was doing the Invisibles.
Okay.
And I put Tomorrow Never Knows on a loop and just summoned John Lennon the way you would summon a demon, but I'm sitting in a circle of Beatles albums. No, but right, and seriously, this head made out of what looked like visual, like notes, chiming music, appears of John Lennon rotating in the room. And it's not, I know it's not there, but it's there. I see it. What the fuck? This can't be. And he tells me a song, and I'd recorded this song. It's on
the fuck out of here.
It's on the internet, and it's like a kind of crappy B-side from the Revolver period. But it does sound kind of Lennon-esque, you know?
That is magic.
Yeah, and it's just, all I was doing was kick everything out of your head except the idea of John Lennon. And that's what happened.
You know, your mind can actually do that. Just tap in. Well, I mean, conceivably, there's billions and billions of alternate realities all happening right now in the same space, in the same time, like as we are, just at a different frequency so that we can't interact with each other. But who's to say that there's not a vibration you can reach mentally that can tap into what is happening, like all of time and space essentially is happening at once. So
Bell non-locality theory. You know, it's bizarre that our brains are some sort of Bell non-locality telescopes. You know, the human cerebral cortex is the most densely interconnected piece of material known to human science. And with non-locality theorems, you know, our brains are made of stardust, so that means they're connected to other particles of the same star that blew up and went in different directions in some weird... I'm not, like, trying to throw down any type of ironclad theory here. I'm just saying, whatever is actually happening is far fucking weirder. It's not weirder. This is a line that I wish I could tell you who said this line, but it's a beautiful line. Maybe like Alfred North Whitehead or something, but like, reality is not only weirder than you suppose, it's weirder than you can suppose. And that's what doing 5 dried grams does. It's like you climb the cliff of human weirdness. Like, there's really nothing stranger that you can do in human skin than 5 dried grams and still retain your consciousness.
Well, I mean,
without knocking yourself the fuck out.
No,
and
but
being
we
terrified.
haven't tried ayahuasca or DMT or, you know,
We've tried Salvia divinorum. There's some... You're right. We do have some ground to conquer. But this is a major kill. What I'm saying is, you can... you go to that peak. You climb all that way. It's hard as fuck. There's not a lot of people who climb that high.
It's long.
And what you see is just a larger vista of weirdness. It's not the truth. You don't get up there and you're like, enlightenment. It's like, you know, there is a huge... There's more to reality than we've ever possibly conceived of up to this point. And, you know, I think it's our job as people who, you know, who strive to cobble together art. It's our job to take those vistas that we see when we're out there and make some sort of graphic representation of, if not the totality of it, then the sentimentalities of it. You know, like, what does it feel to be there? Bring those feelings back and put them into art. Because what else the fuck can you do, my friend? I don't know.
I think art kind of influenced it a little bit too. In fact, like, I got a real Midsummer Night's Dream vibe at one point. You know, like I mentioned Oberon's Garden, but like, you know, there was a real like feeling of like, wow, the Fae.
Yeah, or you know, this
beyond,
Jungian hypothesis of the collective unconscious and that there are archetypes floating all around and is very powerful on mushrooms for sure. For sure, there is. You know, you feel these gravitational pulls of cultural forces, I guess. Like, what people pay attention to has power. I guess you realize that. I mean, there are powers out there, but what people are currently paying attention to gains a certain amount of power. Brings to my mind Neil Gaiman. You know, Neil Gaiman's American Gods. Pornography, the god, the interstate, the god,
Well, I
the
haven't
internet.
read it, I should say.
Read the book. Read the book, my friend. But no,
Yeah,
just I mean, like, the idea that gods are where a huge amount of humans communally pool their intent. They're that nexus of human intentionality. I think in that kind of space that you find yourself in after 5 dried grams, you find yourself running into those clouds of intentionality, those clouds of human, like, you see what the human endeavor is all about, like, where people are putting it. That's my 2 cents.
I remember the exact moment that the plot for American Gods came together, which was slightly different to Sandman. In Sandman, I just loved the idea that if I was going to do a story about an anthropomorphic incarnation of the idea of dreaming, that he'd look human because it's a comic and he has to look like something. And so at that point, when you're bringing gods on, mostly, in Sandman, I kept my gods sort of off in cool, gaudy places, except for the few that had retired. One was working as a travel agent in there, and he definitely retired. In American Gods, it came from another sort of thing. It came from me flying to Iceland, having a stopover in Iceland, getting in really early in the morning, getting no sleep on the plane, but going, I'll just keep going until it gets dark. And it was July the 3rd. I love the fact that you guys have seen where this plan goes wrong way before I did. And what actually happened in Iceland was at about 3 o'clock in the morning, it got a little bit overcast for about half an hour, and then the sun was out, and my body clock was just going, I don't know what's going on, I'm just going. So at 1 o'clock the following day, I'm wandering the streets of Reykjavik, and the world has gone flat. Everything is flat, everything is weird, and nothing is open, except for a tourist office. So I wander into the tourist office, because there's nothing else in Reykjavik on that Sunday, and I see the travels of Leif Erikson laid out on a tabletop diorama. And I look at them, and I think that's really interesting. And then I thought, I wonder if they brought their gods with them. And suddenly it was like everything was there. I thought, well, obviously they did. And then they died out. And then, having died out, the gods would be just sort of hanging around, and now they'd be eking out a living on the edge of things, pumping gas and doing minor scams. And we have these sad, lonely, blue-collar gods, and I can say everything I want to say about the peculiar American immigrant experience, which was one that I was going through. I mean, having been here for 8 years and going, it's nothing like the movies. It seems to be a real place with all sorts of quirks that are not getting documented. So that was the driving point for that.
Interesting. Apparently, American Gods is being made into a show currently. Netflix, I think.
Well, that was just one of the main ideas, and I think Neil Gaiman isn't alone in having that concept, but yeah, it's a powerful idea. There's another really cool scene in that book where he talks about like the Hall of Forgotten Gods.
Right, yeah.
And, it's just all these kind of, there were cultures all over the world that put all their energy into like worshiping these beings, and now all trace of that worship in word, stone, and survivor and DNA has been scrubbed completely from the current existence of humankind. Yeah. So, I think a key word would be perspective. Like, you get a shitload of perspective when you do this.
And it's not something like recreational. I should really put a stamp on that. It's like, you do this once and you're good.
Yeah, you're
not. Yeah, like, it's probably, there may be another time in my life when I choose to try it again, but not for a while.
Yeah, it's
it was an intense.
It's not a fun experience.
Yeah.
It's an intense, it's a beautiful, it's a life-changing, it's an important experience, but it's not a fucking, no, you're not hooked.
No,
you're not gonna abuse that.
Recreational druggies. I definitely believe like doing the breathing and the yoga and all the sort of mental imagery of opening chakras and all that definitely tapped into pushing my experience to a different level. Because after that, I started seeing time in triplicate for a while, where a bird would fly by and then it would rewind and do it again, and then it rewind and it would do it again.
When you bring intentionality to a situation like that, and you're not just, whoa, I'm at a bush party and I'm mangled on shrooms, dude. When you're like, especially given that we've read the work of The Secret Drugs of Buddhism, name? Michael Crowley.
This book is about a psychedelic potion called Amrita, which played a vital role in late Indian Buddhism. Evidence for this historical use of psychedelics is not hard to come by, but so far it has either been overlooked or willfully ignored. Accordingly, it is not uncommon to hear that drugs have no place in Buddhism. Well, perhaps that's true of modern Buddhism, but they were once held in high regard. At least, psychedelic mushrooms were, and so was an Indian version of ayahuasca.
Amazing, secretdrugs.org, amazing website. Like, this man has proved pretty much beyond a shadow of doubt that all early Indian sophisticated Buddhism, that like the Naropa University and then through Padmasambhava into Tibet included psilocybin mushroom use in abhisheka, like initiatory ritual. Mm-hmm. And when you're doing this stuff and you have kind of that stuff in mind, not necessarily I'm going to become a saint or something, but just look, I'm a decent human and I've got my life's kind of shit together. Yeah, I want to can we like see what it's all about? Then the answer is a resounding yes. Mm-hmm. And it's you're right. It's not something that you would eagerly peer back into because it's such a life-altering, profound experience. But it's a valuable experience. Mm-hmm. It's a life-changing experience.
And you certainly don't need the mushrooms if you could somehow get yourself
so
focused on the meditation and breathing aspect of it.
Maybe if your whole society was with you and it was just, your life was channeled to that. But what I will say is that after you've had this experience and you'd like to re-tap into it, it's that much easier because you've and you do see the ritual value of how that stuff would have worked. And if you do, if you even just sit cross-legged and hum for a little while and think a few pure thoughts, the reward that you reap is obvious. These plant teachers have been used by humanity for this purpose for millennia to achieve fantastic personal and societal goals. I don't know what there's so much more we can say on this, but I'd like to say try it. Alone in silent darkness, where you haven't hurt anybody or mess up your societal commitments. Go for it.
Silent darkness. There you have it. I guess that wraps up the inaugural podcast of Crass.
One of many. Crass and Spurious.
Very good.
We should have been a little more Crass and definitely a lot more Spurious.
There's always the future.
We haven't checked any of the facts that we've said.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all been bullshit.
My underwear dirty. So
yeah.
Crass is that.
Believe nothing, question everything. Thanks for coming out.
Much love, my homies.